Next, we will be hearing our speaker today, and I met Cheryl through John because we're doing a little bit of partnering with her organization, Children of the Nations, and before Cheryl was with Children of the Nations, which is based in Silverdale, she was in the business world and doing a lot of training, speaking nationally. And I love when somebody takes their decades of business experience and then helps the nonprofit world, which I think sometimes is well-meaning but doesn't always create the intended results. So she is, is director, I know sustainability is in there. Director of Sustainability at Children of the Nations. And that's a topic near and dear to my heart because I think it's great to do kind things, but if they're not sustainable, we may have done more harm than good. And Cheryl is really thinking that through for her organization and helping them with that. So she is going to be talking about next generation sustainable leadership. So Cheryl, welcome.
Today, we're going to talk about sustainable ethical leadership and next generation leadership. And I'll tell you a little bit about what Children of the Nations does and how we're doing this in Africa and what it means for businesses here. But as I was preparing this and I was going through this last night, I thought, it doesn't matter where you sit right now as far as leadership in the United States is concerned, which is why I put that question forward. We have at no time in history of the United States had a greater cry and need for ethical, sustainable leadership right now. And it doesn't matter what side of the fence you sit on. It doesn't matter what you believe. It doesn't matter if you're evangelical, Pentecostal, Democrat, Republican, atheist. There has been no greater time, I think, in the history of the United States that we are desperately searching for ethical, sustainable leadership. So this is a very timely conversation. And a little bit about my background, and where my passion for sustainable leadership has come from. I spent 12 years in the Navy, so I'm a Navy vet. And my first experience with leadership, I was a pretty wild kid from New York City. And my first lesson in leadership was when I was a section leader in boot camp. And anybody here military, ex-military vets? So I'm in boot camp, and a girl in my unit didn't do something right. We had an inspection, and my company commander comes over to me and says, "Okay, drop down, give me 20." And my response was, well, she's the one who didn't do it. Why are you making me do that? And she very clearly told me, she said, when you're on a team and when you're a leader, whatever happens to the least person on your team happens to you. You're responsible for that team. Well, that was a quick lesson that I learned, and I stayed in the military for a long time. And then I went to Starbucks. My history is after being in the military, where I got into computer technology. I spent 20 years in the technology industry. And after spending time in technology and in Redmond, and that was a time when I was in technology before the internet was even on the scene. And I'll never forget when I was working and I was up on Microsoft's campus, and all of a sudden internet and laptops were up, and you'd be in a meeting and all you would see was the back of 20 laptops, because we're all just, and after about 15 years of that, I suffered major burnout, as did many of my colleagues. And I went to work for Starbucks corporate office, and I said, coffee, that's got to be the answer, because technology, too tough. So let's go make coffee. And I went to work for Starbucks corporate office, and I had to interview with Jim Donnell, who was at the time the CEO of Starbucks. And he asked me the question, he said, tell me what you know about leadership. And my mind went straight back to that moment in boot camp when my company commander told me what leadership was all about. And he said, right answer. And the answer was that leadership is not about you being out front and being solo and doing what you do, but it's about being part of a team. It's about ethics. It's about integrity. It's about the fact that leadership is not what you do in front of your team, but it's what you do when your team's not looking. And those are all the lessons that I learned, and it became really important to me in my business life and in my personal life about leadership. The other thing that was really compelling for me, and Steve and I got to talk a little bit about this, is Orrin Smith, who was the COO, I don't know if you guys remember, of Starbucks for a long time, one time came up to us, and we had 6 principles at Starbucks that we had to follow. 6 principles that, priority order. The last of the 6 principles was to be profitable. The first was treat others with respect, be knowledgeable, treat your team members with respect, and down the list. The last one was be profitable. And I'll never forget Orrin saying, if you do the first 5, the last one will happen. You do not have to worry about having a profitable business if you do the first 5. If you treat others well, lead with respect, then you will be successful in what you do. And so that was another huge leadership lesson. And so after I left Starbucks, I decided that I wanted to go into the nonprofit sector. As Pat said, I just had this passion that 25 years of business, technology, working at Starbucks, working in the corporate world. 1, it was getting really tiresome, lots of travel. And 2, I wanted to be able to give back what I think God had blessed me with, to be able to go into the industry and do work in the nonprofit sector. I had a passion for Africa, I had a passion for children, and a passion for business. And I am really fortunate that I get to do all 3 when I work for Children of the Nations. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Children of the Nations, and then we're going to talk about sustainable leadership, and then drive that back to how that maps to where we are today. So just to tell you a little bit about Children of the Nations and what we do, we are an organization, local organization based in Silverdale, started 20 years ago. We are now in 5 countries serving over 6,000 children around the world. It's a blessing. It is absolutely a blessing. Our organization is run by Chris and Debbie Clark. We have what we call village partnerships in 5 countries. We provide food, education, social support in Sierra Leone, Malawi, Uganda, Dominican Republic, and Haiti. Our organization goes after children that are in the worst of the worst of the worst situations. So we have gone into countries like Sierra Leone right after the Civil War, and now after Ebola. So we've walked through that for 20 years with them. We went into Uganda after they had their war. We went into Haiti after the earthquake hit, and we find the children that are usually double orphaned, kids that have no parents, have no hope, have no future. You've seen the pictures, you've read the stories. Those are the children that we go after. But what we decided was that we are not just trying to raise children to give them a handout, but we're raising children who are going to transform their nation, because we really believe that these young people can transform their nation. So all of these children come from a very poor background. But we're pleased to say that we have about 71 of our students in 2015. Now, we have many more graduates than that. But just last year alone, we graduated 70 students out of high school. And right now, we have over 100 kids that are in university, and we have several children that have graduated university. And remember, these are kids that they're double orphaned, came from some of the worst situations, and are now positioned to transform their nation. So the question is, how do we teach them to do that? How do we make that happen? And as we're thinking about Africa, don't think that Africa is too far away from what we are dealing with right here in our own United States, with kids that are being left behind, kids that are in the social services system, kids that are double orphaned, and how do they overcome that to become leaders in their nation? So here's a little bit on the numbers behind the work that we do. We feed about 4,000 kids a day. We see about 10,000 individuals each year in our medical clinics and facilities. We have about 4,000 children in school. We have high schools and elementary and primary schools in all of those countries. Clinics in 3 of those countries, and really just God has really blessed the opportunity to do the work that we've done. So a little bit about what we do. I always love to show my pictures, and especially of the kids that we work with. So these are some of the young ladies, the young women that we work with, especially in Malawi. And these girls have overcome the fact that most of them get married at 11 years old. 11 years old. They're getting married. Most of them are victims of domestic violence and abuse. Most of them never get a chance to go to school. And this is just a subset of the girls that I get the privilege to work with that are all now in business training classes. So let me tell you a little bit about that with John, my wonderful partner, John Sween. So I came back from Malawi after my first visit, and I said, you know, these kids are amazing. They've gone through high school. They've gone through university. But the unemployment rate in Malawi is 80%, 80% of the people in Malawi do not have jobs. There's no industries, there's no factories there for people to have jobs. So I said, John, how do you help me do what you're doing in India here in Africa? So I am so happy to announce that this July, John and I are leading a team of businessmen and women into Malawi to teach these young people how to be entrepreneurs. So we're taking people like yourselves who are interested in taking the knowledge that you have and imparting it into these young people to teach them how to be entrepreneurs. I kicked off a mini version of this program in January. We had 21 young people that we were able to give small loans to start businesses. But micro businesses around the world have failed traditionally because they don't have the training that goes along with it. So you go and give in Africa and give somebody $200, trust me, it's going to feed somebody, the family's going to take it. It will not last for 3 days because people are so poor and they don't understand what to do with that money. John and I get to go and lead this team of business people. One of the people who's going with us has just been ranked by Inc. magazine as having one of the fastest growing companies in the U.S. this year, Rifle Paper Company, and we have several others, and we're just thrilled to have the opportunity to do that, and these young women will be some of the benefactors of that. The other thing that we're doing heavily in Malawi and in Africa is looking at this issue, and I skipped over the farm, but of sustainability. So we are not an organization that wants to do relief. We are actually moving away from just shipping meals over, shipping containers over, to teaching people how to farm. To the point where we're even looking at, instead of shipping furniture, how do we help somebody start a furniture business? Or rather than shipping shoes over, how do we help somebody start a shoe business? The money that we spend shipping food and articles over to Africa, if we took that same money and invested it in those people to train them to have a business, a small business like you all do, right? Painting business, construction business, then they now have a skill that lasts them for a lifetime rather than waiting for someone to come and bring them something that will last them for a very short period of time. Now, we always have issues. Right now in Malawi, unfortunately, about 2.8 million people are at risk of starvation because of El Nino, because of climate change. So in certain cases, we do have to go in with relief and just save people as much as we can. But if we can teach agriculture and we can teach some of the other things that we are teaching, then we're able to really interrupt that cycle of tragedy. Think about this. Ebola hit Sierra Leone, Guinea, Liberia, 3 of the poorest countries in the world, almost devastated them. Ebola hit the United States. We just don't hear about it. We were able to wipe it out just like that, because we have the medical facilities, we have the doctors, the nurses to be able to get rid of that, right? So it's not that there won't be tragedies in the world, it's that these people have no infrastructure to overcome something like Zika virus or dengue or Ebola. So it's not that those things don't happen here in the United States, it's just that we have medical centers on every corner. We have doctors and research facilities here that override those things. Thrive by 5 is a program that we're starting to look at our babies 0 to 5, because what we've realized is if we don't look at the youngest ones and start there, by the time we get them in school, sometimes it's too late to change their mental behavior. What I do at Children of the Nations is look at sustainability. We go from transaction to transformation. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but it's what I just said, going from crisis response to looking at things that promote behavioral change, making sure that things are owned by the community, making sure that whatever we do is sustainable within that region. So let's talk about what's changing in Africa, so from a business perspective, now that we know a little bit about COTN. I can tell you that in Africa since 1990, extreme poverty has been cut in half. 2.6 people now have gained access to clean drinking water. 2.6 billion people. HIV infections are down by 40%. More kids are in primary school than ever before. So even though we have still a dire situation, there is progress that's being made in Africa. And what if I also told you that GDP has risen by 4.9% a year since 2008? Telecommunications, banking, retail is flourishing, construction is booming. Africa has become a landscape for new business. It has become an absolute landscape for new business. Private investment inflows are surging. When I go into Malawi, which is last year, Malawi is ranked the poorest country in the world, the poorest. I go into Malawi and in the dark, because nobody has electricity, and I'm driving down the road, and looming out in the distance is this huge stadium with lights, and I'm like, what is that? It looked like a spaceship. It looked like, Encounters of a Close Kind or whatever. And I said, what is that? And they said, that's our new stadium, our soccer stadium. And I said, oh, well, do you play soccer? No. Do you have a soccer team? Nope. And another country comes in, builds the stadium. And so then the next day in the daytime, I could see what was happening. Around that stadium, you see new homes being built up, right? Industry is starting to come in to these countries in Africa. I'll tell you one of the reasons, and the New York Times had a great article on this. Africa has more untapped resources and land than any other country in the world. Where other countries are running out of space, they're running out of food to feed people, Africa is an untapped resource. More improvements in Africa, 50% of the youth. Now, these are new consumers in the world live in Africa. 50% of the youth in the world live in Africa. 80% of major technology companies now have a home in Africa. Nokia, Microsoft, AT&T, Nextel, BlackBerry used to be there. Apple, huge conferences and presence in Africa, especially in South Africa. I was also telling Steve that I have a picture, and I wish I'd put it up, of the Maasai. The Maasai is a tribe in Kenya that are still wearing the long skirts, and they have the face paint and the spears, traditional. And literally, I have a picture of Maasai with a spear in one hand and a mobile phone in the other hand, in the middle of the jungle, trying to kill a lion with a mobile phone in their hand. Everybody, and I mean everybody in Africa has a mobile phone. But what does that mean for all of you? What does that mean for the U.S.? It means that there is a communication to be able to sell into that new marketplace in Africa, especially with this new group of consumers that are coming up that just stay on their mobile phone. They're like our kids. I mean, they're just on their phone all day long. The communities are changing in Africa. Right now, if you looked at Africa 15, 20 years ago, you had a small urban population and a huge rural population. What's happening now, because of all of this new industry, is that the urban population is now bigger than the rural population. The problem is that there are no jobs in the urban areas. And so you have all these young people running to downtown in Kenya. They're running to Lilongwe. They're running in Ethiopia, to the major cities. And they are overwhelming those cities, and there's no jobs, and the rural area is still being left open and untapped. So it's really a scary situation. So what's the opportunity for U.S. businesses, right? I mean, there's an opportunity, as I was saying, for us to leverage mobile technology for two reasons. One, to have a social impact in Africa, and two, to be able to do business in Africa. Think about the social impact of having a mobile phone in your hand. So we have a new program called Motek, and it's simply a program because so many women die in the village during childbirth, because you have a complication, there's nobody there, there's no hospital, there's no doctors, there's no nurses, but I have a mobile phone. So if I have a problem and I could text my question or say, hey, this is what's happening, and I have a nurse on the other end who can say, this is how you need to respond to that, we found that mobile technology is saving lives. When you have a farmer who's out in the field who finds that his crop is being taken over by a certain insect, and he can take a picture of it and he can send that to an organization that writes him back and says, oh yeah, that's this bug, and some vinegar on the root will kill it and you'll be fine. You save somebody's livelihood. So there's an opportunity for U.S. business to come into this market from a social perspective and then from a business perspective. You have a huge consumer base in Africa for product and for market. Huge. And you can communicate with them through digital technology and through mobile technology. So what's the challenge? The challenge is that, as I said, these young people are moving into the urban areas of Africa thinking that they're going to get jobs, and there are no jobs. The other problem is even the kids that we're graduating from university, they haven't been taught leadership. One of the worst things in Africa right now is corrupt leadership. Corruption runs just rampant in Africa. So we have these young leaders who are really trying to do something different. They're really trying to start a new business, start a new program, but they haven't been trained in what ethical leadership really means. And they're also being pulled back by families that are still dying and in poverty and malaria and HIV, but yet they're trying to step into this new paradigm. So that is a huge challenge for us, and that's one of the reasons that I'm so thrilled that John is going with us to Malawi, because we're going to be training on how ethical leadership and sustainable leadership will change the landscape in Africa. And again, it also changes the landscape here in the United States with our young people. So what's the solution? How are we going to have to make this different? What do we get to do? And I know we're a very locally based group. We look at, I'm just trying to get my business here up and running, and how do I just do what I can do for myself? Well, part of the solution is exactly what we're doing, which is going into Africa, training, teaching, opening up new marketplaces, teaching people about versatility, teaching people about digital marketing. It's so easy now for a young person in Africa to start a business online and sell to people in the United States. But they have to be taught how to do that. On both continents, and I say this on both continents, it's critical that we are going back to the basics on ethical, sustainable leadership. It's absolutely critical. And we haven't done that. We've done a poor job of, we start our businesses and then we get very, introspective, and we're all about us. And I challenge you all that there's something bigger out there to do with the businesses you have. You have an opportunity to share your knowledge and what you do with other people around the world globally. Huge opportunity. Huge opportunity. Painting. So we go and we're painting a small building that the kids, had built for a little, what they call a tuck shop. And I'm painting and I say to the boys, hey, you want to help? And they're like, we have no idea how to do that. No idea how to pick up a paintbrush and paint a building. And think about if those young people knew how to paint a building, how much money they could make in Africa by simply painting, by knowing how to paint. Think about how much money young people could make when they know how to build bricks. That's all everybody uses there is bricks. It's simple things. It's not having to go over and teach them how to be scientists and doctors and mathematicians. Yeah, we get that. But some of the most simple skills, construction skills, are so essential in Africa, and they have no idea. And somebody who could go over and say, I'm going to teach you how to build a building the right way. And while I'm teaching you that, I'm teaching you some leadership and the ethical, sustainable leadership that we know is the right thing to do. We have 2 judges that are going with us this summer, and they're going to teach social justice, ethical development, and character development, Christian leadership to our young people, because we don't teach the business side without teaching that part as well. So what are next generation leaders? These are the leaders that are coming up in Africa right now that are going to change that continent. But they can't do it because they don't have the role models that we do. They don't have people in country who can teach them about finance. I have a young man who came up to me and he said, I want to be an investment banker in Africa. And I'm like, well, that's going to be a challenge. But guess what? There are businesses there that you can invest in, and it's that model of, but he said, but I don't know how to do it. I know I want to do it, but I don't know how to do it. What you do in marketing and media, amazing. The music opportunity in Africa and the movie opportunity is just phenomenal, but our young people there have no idea how to do it. So it's an opportunity for us to connect what we do well and to take it over globally and teach over there and teach ethical leadership, and then be able to open up new markets that we can tap into. Because those markets aren't going to open unless we go over and help. The situation in Africa is still so dire with our young people that it won't change unless we're able to go over and help. So the theory of collectives and theory of inclusion I'm going to skip over, but it's just a way of saying, how do we teach them to work together inclusively and in collectives instead of working independently? Right now it's like, if you give me $100, I can go and do this. And we say, no, how about if you get 4 or 5 of your friends together, let's build like a market economy and we'll give you $500 and you guys can sell to each other and work with each other. How do we teach inclusiveness and this theory of collectives to our young people? So again, how can U.S. businesses, how can businesses here in Edmonds get involved? Invest in training next generation leadership there and here. I challenge all of you that have businesses here, go find a young person and teach them what you know. Go find a young person and teach them how to paint, teach them how to do construction, teach them how to do marketing, and show them what it means to be an ethical leader. Because we have that problem here in our country as much as we have it in Africa. Ethical leadership is disappearing quickly. Everybody is out for themselves. We have to invest in training. We have to be able to then fuel that with innovation and technology. So like I was telling you, the Motek program. So we get to bring over new ideas and technology that are critical for them. We need to be able to make sure, and that should say social, that we're bringing these solutions to social problems as well. Because, you can't teach a man how to fish if the man can't get to the river. And so in order to get someone to fish, you have to give them a pole, teach them how to fish, but if they're too ill to get down to the river, they can't fish. So we have to address the social problems that we're faced with in Africa and incorporate systemic change with consideration for cultural values. And this is my last point, is that one of the worst things we can do is go in and try to say, well, this is the right way to do it because this is the way we do it in the United States. We have to be able to respect others' cultural values. And again, that's important there, and it's important here too. And we've lost the ability to do that. We just get something in our mind and this is the way it has to be, and I've done this, and trust me, this is it, this is right. We hear this on NPR for the last couple of months now, my way is the only way, and we are not listening to each other, and we're not respecting each other. And we're not taking the time to say, how do we come together to make this thing work for everybody? Not just for this group or that group, not for this tribe or that tribe, not because we want to take our Western culture and force it on people, but because we want to be able to share what we know, what God has blessed us with, to say, hey, have you thought about it this way? My funniest thing, I was teaching these business students last week, and I said, I'm going to teach you guys how to do an elevator pitch. And they looked at me and said, a what? And I said, an elevator pitch, 30 seconds, bottom floor, top floor. And they just kind of kept looking at me, and I looked at one of my assistants, and I said, do they get it? She said, they have no idea what an elevator is. And I said, what would they call it? She said, well, they would call it a lift. But look around you. There's no buildings here taller than 2 stories, so they have no idea what you're talking about. So, again, my Western culture kind of snuck in there, and I had to say, okay, let's call it a farm race, or something like that. So we have to respect other people's cultures. We have to be able to stop long enough to take what we do and what we know and share it with others, not just here locally, but globally. We have to teach sustainable, ethical leadership, because it's the only thing that's going to change the United States. It's the only thing that's going to change the world. And in order for us to reach out into this global marketplace that we're in, we really have to look at ourselves and say, how do I respond? How do I participate in this global outreach that needs to happen in this world? So lots of stuff packed into 20 minutes or whatever. And I'll be around to answer questions, but just some food for thought as we look at business today and what we're doing. And everything that you do can impact thousands of lives across the world. So it's my challenge for you today. Thanks.